So here's our little reference for how this works. So let's create a function called curry. Const curry equals some function. It takes a string. Well, let's leave it like this for now. It takes a function. That's what it takes. And then we need to get it to work with this behavior, but with just two of them. We don't need to do this. Okay? Just because for this exercise I wanted to simplify it for everyone's benefit, really. Okay, so we have a function, and we need to return a function. We know that, right? Okay. So when we call it, we return a function. When we call it a second time, we want to save that value. So we are going to need to be able to take an argument there for the first one. And then we're going to return another function. And we need to have a second argument in there. And then once we get to that second argument, then we can call our function with both of those arguments. arg2. We probably want to return it. All right, so shall we run this? So the first thing we do is we run curry with our function name. Okay. So function name is ABC. And we return this function. So curried now holds the value of this function body here. When we call it, so function is our ABC, then arg is going to be 1. And then we return this function. We call it again. We can do that because it returns a function, right? Remember when we tried it before, it didn't work because it returned undefined? Now it works because we are actually returning a function. And we can do this little bit where we do it twice in a row. And then we pass 2. And because of scope, we retain access to function, arg, and of course arg2. And so we're 2 levels deep. We're calling our function with arg and arg2 and returning that value. And that's the basis of implementing a curry function. Obviously, it gets a little bit more complicated when you have varying numbers of inputs, right? Longer arguments, right? For this one, we're just assuming there's 2. But if you can imagine, if you don't know how many there are, there's some looping involved, probably some recursion to get that to work. But that's the basic value. So we're just returning nested functions. Cool? Any questions about this? No? Okay. And the next one is compose. Let's get our little example, just so we have something to run. Okay. Get our word wrap. Perfect. Okay, so we have our compose function. And for this case, we're going to do 2 as well. So we're going to say const compose equals a function. And it's going to take 2 arguments. Okay? And the first thing that needs to happen is that we need to return a function so that we can call it later. So let's set that up. Let's return a function here. And it needs to be able to take some arguments here. Let's just say it'll take 1 for now. And then we want to first call exclaim. So that's the second one. So we're going to call, let's call this function 1 and function 2. So let's call function 2 with our arg, and we're going to return that to a result. And then we are going to pass that result into the original function, the first function that we passed in. And we're just going to return whatever that returns. And there you have it. So, and this isn't taking into consideration a variable number of functions passed or a variable number of arguments passed. Similarly with curry, you would have to probably you'd have to keep track of how many functions there are, and then for args here, this would be a problem with an arrow function because we probably would want to retain access to the argument's keyword, so we would need to use a regular function for that. Those are some considerations for a more robust solution to compose. But again, so here we're returning a function with an argument passed in, the second one, and this one we're returning nested arrays until we get everything that we need to finally call our function. We retain access because parameters are just like local scoped variables. And yeah. Any questions about those solutions?
So if we wanted to basically generalize either of these, we can get into like storing arguments or functions in an array in the arguments object and then slicing it off one by one and doing that like recursively. That's basically how you would kind of go about it.
Yeah, well, I think for this one, if this wasn't an arrow function and we had access to the arguments array,
Yeah.
you could just, you know, you could really just do function apply
Oh, okay.
this arguments. That would make it general. But for this, for calling each of those functions with the result of that function would require some kind of loop,
Yeah.
whether it's a recursive loop or a while loop
yeah,
or something
just
like that,
some
or just
sort
a
of
regular loop. That's what you would have to do.
Okay.
Yeah.